U.S. President Donald Trump and the Democratic People's Republic of Korea leader Kim Jong Un are gearing up to meet in Hanoi, the capital of Vietnam, on Wednesday and Thursday for their second summit. Since the two leaders met in Singapore last June, critics say the meeting failed to produce any concrete action when it comes to the DPRK's nuclear weapons program. The expectations this time are arguably a bit higher, with both sides expected to build on their agreement to work toward complete denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. What can we expect to come out of this summit? What's the significance of holding the summit in Vietnam, a country that has gone from a U.S. enemy to a peaceful trading partner in less than 50 years? And given this is Kim Jong Un's fifth time to China in just 1 year, what role is he hoping China will play in the negotiations? Welcome to a special edition of The Point, an opinion show coming to you from Beijing. I'm Li Xin. Joining me here in the Beijing studio are Zhao Tong, fellow from the Carnegie-Tsinghua Center for Global Policy, and Harvey, Dzodin, senior fellow of the Center for China and Globalization. Gentlemen, welcome to The Point. As we speak, President Trump is about to land in the Vietnamese capital of Hanoi and start this much anticipated second summit with his DPRK counterpart. But let's first take a look at how the DPRK leader arrived on the site of this negotiation. For many Western audience, he arrived by train and then by car. But for the Chinese, he spent almost 2 days, right, traveling in a slow-speed train from North to South China. Zhao Tong, let me start by asking you, what exactly is the significance and the meaning of such an arrangement on the part of the DPRK?
Well, maybe it is because the North Korean security personnel feel it is safer for Kim Jong Un to travel by train compared with air flight. But I think more importantly, the symbol of this travel is important. It shows that North Korea really trusts China for providing security to its top leader. And also maybe Kim Jong Un, who is a reform-oriented leader, who wants to embark on a different path for North Korea in the future to focus on economic development. Maybe he wants to use this opportunity to see the most part of China. He has traveled to the northern part of China. According to publicly available record, he might not have seen the rest of this country. So to see the achievements of China's decades of reform and opening up might be useful for his own domestic experience in North Korea.
Yeah, well, as I mentioned in the beginning, he has been to China 5 times, right? It's all of a sudden it's like he's a frequent guest here. So Harvey, in that sense, how important do you think this trip through China is to Kim Jong Un?
I think it's very important to him. I think about the song "Sentimental Journey." And
he was gearing up for the meeting?
Not only that, but also the fact that 60 years ago, his grandfather made a similar journey through China to Korea, to Vietnam, to meet with Ho Chi Minh. And so I think this is hearkening back to that. And so I think that it's one of sentiment, but also of great hope.
Well, some people are saying this could be a kind of a forced choice for Kim Jong Un, that he doesn't really have any other option but traveling in China. Do you see it that way, Zhao?
Not necessarily, I think. Again, it's a technical issue about whether the North Korean's own airplane can fly without refueling directly to Hanoi, but there is always the choice of doing a stopover somewhere in between. And Kim Jong Un seems fine with flying in the air all the time, so I don't see that he doesn't have other options.
I think there's 2 issues here. Number one, the North Korean plane is a Russian plane. It's 40 years old or so. Because of the various sanctions, they have trouble getting parts. But by the same token, there was apparently some pushback from DPRK and Kim because using the Air China plane with the Chinese flag aside him when he got off the plane maybe sent a message that he didn't want to send particularly.
Okay. Well, whatever the story behind that, he is there and seems to be very warmly received, and President Trump is expected to arrive in just moments from now. It's of course on everybody's mind, what exactly can we expect from the second summit? What exactly does President Trump expect from the summit? According to Stephen Biegun, who is the U.S.'s special envoy for the DPRK since last August, he said in a very recent speech in Stanford University, he said that President Trump expects significant and verifiable progress on denuclearization, actions that are bold and real to emerge from that next summit. Do you think this is possible, Zhao?
Well, certainly the United States has been putting a lot of real pressure on North Korea to deliver real progress. I think North Korea can, in fact, make some big step forward. Especially, there have been discussions recently about North Korea being open to put its Yongbyon nuclear complex on the negotiating table. And that's a big deal. There are so many different facilities within Yongbyon nuclear complex, and by being willing to shut it down or even dismantle this big complex could really restrict North Korea's capability to build more fissile materials for its nuclear arsenal. So that's something really meaningful. But we don't know how far North Korea is willing to go in that direction. Is North Korea simply talking about shutting down part of the complex or the entirety of the complex, or to go one step further to dismantle this complex, or to go even one step further to
destroying it,
dismantle the complex in a manner that is verifiable with the presence of international inspectors. So those are different levels of cooperation.
Okay. Well, however, many people are having rather low expectations for the second summit. Harvey, what are the rationale on these people's mind that they're not expecting much to come out of the second summit?
Well, I think they expected a lot to come out of the first summit.
And they were disappointed?
And they were very disappointed because, in fact, the communique that came out of that summit offered much less progress than previous negotiations that have been taking place for decades, such as the six-party talks. And so I think people have a low expectation, but having a low expectation, it means that if anything is achieved, it'll be worth that much more. I do think that unless some good progress is achieved in this meeting, that it's going to be difficult to have another meeting. The first meeting was kind of just for show at the end of the day, and so this time they really, both sides have to deliver something.
But some people are saying the first summit, although there were a lot of optics, but it was not totally meaningless. Actually, it was the very first time that the leaders of the DPRK and the United States ever met face to face, and it has always been the wish of the DPRK negotiators to talk to the United States directly. Maybe that is why, compared to the six-party talks, maybe the progress in the negotiation were not so deep, but the significance of having a bilateral summit with the United States really outstrip anything else. Zhao Tong, do you see it anyway in that light?
Yeah, I think one of the most important results of the first summit is that the two countries agreed to the main issue areas that they need to work on in the future. One is denuclearization of Korean Peninsula, second is improving U.S.-DPRK bilateral relationship, and third is to create a so-called lasting peace over the Korean Peninsula or a new peace regime. And at the second summit, both countries agreed that these are still the three main issue areas that they are going to work on. So that's an important overall framework that defines the negotiating for the future.
Yeah. Well, if the first time people were only getting to know each other, right, introduce yourself and having a handshake and feeling the temperature of each other, what would the second time do? And is that also why people find it hard for the two sides to deliver, because to build on something that is so general and in such a short period of time is rather difficult, Harvey?
The problem here is that the North Koreans only wanted to meet with President Trump. So the preliminary meetings that should have gone on for months only went on for a matter of weeks, a few weeks as a matter of fact. And so a lot of the prep work is by nature now shallow. And so I think the North Koreans are hoping that Trump will give them some gifts, because that's the way he is. He reacts very emotively. And I think that the president is hoping that by the power of his personality that he'll be able to continue this romance with President Trump. But it's time for the love letters to stop, and it's time to start negotiating some specific roadmaps for the future.
Well, for the top leaders to bring things along instead of being the seals at the end of a signing ceremony is rather unusual, and this top-down approach is really peculiar about this whole process. Zhao Tong, how would you look at the effectiveness of such an approach, potential effectiveness? Because after all, we are seeing the situation on the Korean Peninsula considerably less confrontational, that the two sides are keep talking to each other, and although we're not seeing any major negotiations going on since the last summit, according to the U.S. administration, according to the special envoy, there have been at least 4 known meetings between the U.S. top diplomats and their DPRK counterparts. So not what is being done, let's say.
Yeah, I think it's, the top-down approach of negotiation produced some important positive results. The two leaders seem to have built some personal chemistry. That is important. We talk about the lack of, many people talk about the lack of real progress. One important factor for that is there is no trust between the two countries. And without trust, North Korea is unable to take certain steps. We remember the United States for a long time asking for a comprehensive list of North Korean nuclear and missile programs to be the first indicator of North Korean sincerity about denuclearization. But without trust, North Korea cannot provide a full inventory of its nuclear and missile programs, because doing that would undermine the survivability of North Korean existing capabilities. So trust building really takes time, and that's why we have been only observing limited progress. But for the top leaders to meet, they talk, they get to know each other, person to person. That chemistry, I think, is important, and if the top leaders start to trust each other, that makes it so much easier for operational level people to make breakthrough on real issues.
Well, it's not reported so much, but I have to say, according to the American side, 55 sets of human remains, which believed to belong to Americans who have fallen in the Korean War, were returned since the last summit, and the demilitarized zone between the two Koreas are actually being demilitarized, and relationship between the DPRK and South Korea have also considerably warmed. Harvey, would you say these would constitute a certain level of trust or trust-building measures between the two sides to provide a certain level of foundation for a second summit to yield result?
I certainly think trust building is the right term here, because I think you have to build these foundations very carefully, and because you have a history of 70 years or so of mistrust between the two sides, and also almost, I would say, a paranoia in North Korea and a concern in America as well that trust building is appropriate at this point. And while we could say that these remains that were returned are just a bunch of bones, they have great value to the families and to the country. So I think this was a very meaningful gesture that was much appreciated by the American side.
All right, we're going to take a very short break, and you have been watching The Point with me, Liu Xin. We'll take a short break, and when we come back, we'll continue to talk about the upcoming summit between U.S. President Donald Trump and the DPRK leader Kim Jong Un. Stay with us. Welcome back. And another set of very important questions rests on the relationship between complete denuclearization and economic normalization for the DPRK. Now, the DPRK leadership has made economic development a top priority for the country while pledging that they will denuclearize. And yet, how will be the sequence of things? I mean, does the DPRK has to completely denuclearize first before the United States reward the country with economic and investment opportunities, or can the two things progress in parallel fashion? Zhao Tong, what is your understanding? Is there any new approach being adopted here, or has it always been the same way?
Well, it hasn't really stayed the same from the beginning. When Trump administration just came into power, their talking point was North Korea has to unilaterally disarm itself before the United States offers any reward. But over time, I think the United States realizes that it cannot create enough coercive pressure on North Korea to force North Korea to disarm once and for all. So it has to be an incremental, step-by-step process. And more important, I think, senior officials in the White House realize that trust building is really the key issue, and that takes time. You know, if we look at a comparison of the U.S.-Vietnam relationship, that took more than 40 years to transform, and it's that type of transformation of bilateral relationship that gives the other country real sense of security. And therefore, because of this reason, in recent months, the United States is willing increasingly to talk about normalizing bilateral relationship with North Korea. There were discussions between the two countries' negotiators about potentially setting up liaison offices in each other's capital cities. That would be a major step towards a normalized bilateral relationship. The United States is also willing to talking about a lasting peace regime. You know, there is a possible declaration in Hanoi tomorrow about ending the Korean War, or at least to end the long-standing bilateral mutual hostility. So those are all meaningful steps that make North Korea feel safer and thus be less dependent on nuclear weapons. So I think those efforts help North Korea be more open towards disarmament.
Okay. In the same speech in Stanford University, Biegun said that the goal he has in mind is to bring different goals all together at the same time, and there will be a perfect outcome moment. He says that the last nuclear weapons leave DPRK, sanctions lifted, flags go up in the U.S. Embassy in the DPRK, peace treaty being signed in the same hour. Harvey, how do you look at the feasibility of everything progressing at the same time while you have no trust?
I think it's an impossible dream and a bridge too far. I first think, and I know you think as well, that the North Koreans will never ever give up all their nuclear weapons. It's just they need the security blanket. But to say that all these elements are going to fall into place at the same time in any reasonable time frame, I think is impossible. So I do think it has to be incremental, step by step, trust building, and getting concrete results, building one on top of another.
Okay, I don't think they're totally contradictory, being incremental and step by step, while having every parallel project reaching the final destination about, you know, the same time. But setting that question aside, Zhao Tong, there is this debate about whether the DPRK is willing to give up their nuclear weapon. Now that the DPRK leader has announced in his New Year address to his people that he will do that, does that tell us enough about the determination of the DPRK leadership in this regard?
Well, I will start with low expectations. I personally believe North Korea is still a very paranoid country. And as a result, it's hard for North Korea to trust any external security guarantee, and therefore it still has strong incentives to maintain an independent nuclear deterrent before the North Korea-US relationship can be fundamentally transformed. But that doesn't mean North Korea couldn't take meaningful steps towards freezing, limiting, or even rolling back its nuclear capabilities. I think North Korea is willing increasingly to talk about shutting down the Yongbyon nuclear complex. that wouldn't undermine North Korea's capacity to maintain its existing nuclear deterrent capabilities.
But that wouldn't mean complete denuclearization, or would it?
That's far from complete denuclearization. North Korea will still be able to operate its existing nuclear forces and missile capabilities, but that puts a very important cap on North Korea's program, and that prevents North Korea from advancing its capabilities both qualitatively and quantitatively.
And there's some discussion actually about freezing the delivery systems, or putting the delivery systems into mothballs, or having China or another country be the custodians for them. So even if they have nuclear capable weapons, without the delivery system, they're not usable.
It's interesting, in Began's speech in Stanford University, he didn't use the words a complete denuclearization. He used final, fully verified denuclearization, and he repeated on several different occasions. Zhao, you're an expert in this field. Does that maybe suggest that the U.S.'s final endgame on this issue has stepped back a little bit, that they are not calling for the complete dismantling of the country's nuclear program, but just calling for a fully verified denuclearization?
Well, I think that's a change of term from the previous terminology of CVID,
right.
Complete, verifiable, and irreversible denuclearization. I think they dropped this term because irreversible seems a little problematic. Anything given time can be reversed, and therefore they started to use this new term, final, fully verified disarmament of the Korean Peninsula. I don't think that's any real step back from previous demand on North Korean nuclear disarmament, but the key element of this term is the last part, the Korean Peninsula. What does it mean? It's not only nuclear disarmament of North Korea, but maybe United States also needs to reduce North Korean perceived nuclear threat posed by the United States. So there's still a big ambiguity over the meaning of the term, and one important goal for the American negotiating team this time is to seek a clear definition about fully final and fully verified disarmament, denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula.
Wow, it sounds already very, very technical, but let's imagine at the end of the two-day meeting what would come out. Another document, but this one would have to be more detailed, right? Not just the general outline of three big grandiose goals. Harvey, what do you think? How detailed can it get?
I think it can get quite detailed in terms of a roadmap. I think that they can take the various elements and put steps and time frames to them, so that they can start working towards real goals rather than fuzzy goals. I think it's very important to do that. I also think that they may make substantial progress. Maybe, for example, they might take some steps to start a negotiation to have the end of this still condition of war, to not necessarily sign an agreement, but to take a giant step forward to anticipate that during this year, actually.
Very some different goals. Some are more complicated, like disarmament or denuclearization, whereas some others might be slightly easier to reach, and I think the U.S. maybe try to tackle the soft bones first. But what is China's role here? China must be watching this very closely. By the way, this approach that we were talking about, incremental parallel discussion, has always been what China has been advocated, right? So what is China doing now? Sitting back and watch, or actively thinking what to do next?
Well, I think China has been very helpful in providing a general framework for the negotiation, which, as you said, has been proven very useful and effective. For the second summit, I think the Chinese role is more implicit than explicit. Simply by the Chinese leader meeting with North Korean leader right before the summit, simply by helping North Korean negotiating team travel through China to arrive at Hanoi, that already sends a signal that China is fully supportive of this process. Some Chinese experts also argue that by showing a very close DPRK-China bilateral relationship, North Korea will feel very confident, so it will be more willing to engage in this negotiation. So I think those are very important indirect role played by China.
Well, is it in China's interest, Harvey, in your perception, that the United States and the DPRK reached a fruitful conclusion, a fruitful discussion?
It's in everybody's interest that they do, and that's why talking is very important, because for so many decades there was only saber rattling and not talking. So now we're at a point where just beginning for important things to happen, concrete steps to happen. And I think it's definitely in China's interest, because China worries about the stability of the Korean Peninsula. It worries about refugees coming across the border if there's any kind of activity which would force those people to flee. So China wants stability. They want a peaceful region and a peaceful world. So absolutely.
Yeah. Well, you were talking about in the past 25 years there were only saber rattling. Well, some people would disagree, because there were at least two agreements, let's say, between the United States and the DPRK to sort of put the situation under control, and yet because of in our understanding, in China's understanding, because of responsibility on both parts, that these agreements didn't fall through. So Zhao Tong, what are different this time that this could be the moment finally?
I think one important difference is today North Korea has already acquired a rudimentary but still effective nuclear deterrent. And that makes North Korea feels much safer than before. As you said, during the 1990s, North Korea seriously considered the idea of engaging with the United States. They talked about setting up liaison office at that time. But North Korea was a little half-hearted at that time. It was hesitant because it was uncertain whether doing so would make its own security problem more secure, more acute. But this time it feels safer, so I think it is much more determined to engage with the United States to build a positive relationship with Washington. I think that's a that result in a much larger chance for normalization of the relationship. Okay, we're going to leave it there. Many thanks to my guest, the Zhao Tong Fellow from the Carnegie-Tsinghua Center for Global Policy, and Harvey Dzodin, a Senior Fellow of the Center for China and Globalization. And with that, we come to the end of this edition of The Point with me, Liu Xin, coming to you from Beijing. As always, you can follow me on Facebook and Twitter using the handle The Point with LX. Download the application called CGTN to watch the show on your mobile devices, or go to YouTube and look for CGTN The Point. Thanks for watching. You've got the point.